Hello again. This is Up in the Attic, War Stop 4. This time I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of these things I've got here on the table here, and because it's all about, say, understanding how the war started, the last war started, and how we can prevent wars in the future. Now, what I never realised, I've already mentioned that my father used to say it was the Zionists who started the war, and they would get us silly souls to fight it. Well, I never realised until I came across this headline here that Judea declares war on Germany. Now, that was in 1933. And in America, there was demonstrations. 40,000 people demonstrated in New York against Germany. Can't think why at that stage. Anyway, so it was quite clear that Judea wasn't going to go to war with Germany. So who was? I think my father was right. It was us silly souls who would go to war and fight the war. Two Christian countries against each other. Absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. And you think of, it's easy for me to say this now because look how many people died. How many of those people who said, "Oh yes, come on, we'll go to war with Germany." How many of them realised how many people would die? How many people realised how long the war would last? How many people realised the result would be the destruction of Germany and we would be on our knees because that's what's happened, because we've gone down, 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 down since that war. In so many ways our culture has been severely damaged. The whole world was damaged by that war, and the wars are still going on now for the same stupid reasons. What are the reasons for it? How is it there's about 60,000 people on that on the memorial up at Aldwywas, the site that has the names of all the soldiers who've died since the last war on the walls? Why did they die? What have they died for? We really have to stop this thing because it's getting too out of hand, and sometime or other someone's going to discover some poison or some chemical, some virus that they'll be able to let out at the bottom of one country, and it will work through the country and destroy everyone and then kill itself. How many people are going to die because of something like that could happen? Because all the time we have this hostility. It's unnecessary. And it's done for a reason. It's certain people who don't care. It's done for money. It's done for power. It's done for greed. Anyway, so that's why. So that's how one of the reasons why we went to war, and to help Poland. We didn't help Poland. That was just an excuse. They had 10 years or so. To build up a war against Germany for the second time, and Christian killing Christians, basically. Absolutely disgrace. It is a disgrace. You know it, I know it. Anyway, so that happened. Now, what was the result of that? Well, I've had some personal experience of that, and that was I took up singing, and that was my teacher there. Nora Grun. She was a German Jewish lady who was told. I had long discussions with her about life in Germany at the time, because when that declaration was made, she said it caused an awful lot of hardship for the Jewish people, because suddenly they were told their host country is their enemy, and a lot of them were assimilating. They were marrying into the German population, and she at the time was an opera singer, and she said it made it very, very difficult because you suddenly became suspicious of people. People became suspicious of you. And so, it was very, very awkward for them, and a lot of Jewish people suffered as a result of that, because they didn't know where they were, as far as sort of our relationship with the ordinary German people. And then you had the young men, of course, with a little bit more bravado and causing problems, and people who went out of their way to to boycott Germany, and then everything was turned around and the hatred started building up, and so it got completely out of hand. Anyway, as a result of discussions with her during my lessons, or I went for her for a number of years, and she did a good job on me, I think, because there I am there with a partner I had at the time. We were just going off to a show, the first show I did as a summer show, and it was at the South Pier in Portsmouth. And there we are, look, Mavis Lane, that's Mavis Lane, and Brian May tenor. So that was a sudden change in my life after, well, all the other things I had been doing. But I certainly learnt a lot from her, and how difficult it was for the Jewish people when the Judea had declared war on Germany. And the interesting thing is that this book here, Cry Havoc, Let Loose the Dogs of War, this book was written in 1933, and it's an anti-war book, and it was obviously very successful, because it was first printed in 1933, and there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 40 reprints, and it's an anti-war book. And this guy Beverly Nichols here, he was saying that basically they were building up even 1933 for the Second War against Germany. These are some other books that you hardly see. Germany Must Perish and the War Goals of the World Plutocrats. Another one, the Holocaust or Hoax. You see, there's lots of doubts about some of these things here, and this is the trouble with war, because people lie, and they lie and lie again. And so, and particularly with things like this, we should know exactly what the history of the war was now, and who died and who didn't die. We should have those sort of figures clearly for us to understand, so we can understand. Adolf Hitler, founder of Israel. How Britain initiated both world wars. And this one here, War is a Racket, by General Smedley Butler. He investigated the First World War and found how so many of those young men gave their lives in the war to end all wars. That's how they sold it to the Americans, because the Americans couldn't care less how Germany was run or how we were run during the First World War. But the young men did. The young men gave their lives, and I think you can say many of them gave their lives. But at the same time, the Smedley Butler here investigated some of the manufacturers of the military requirements, uniforms and this, that and the other, and they found the vast amount of money they made was absolutely ridiculous. And would you believe it, someone managed to convince Uncle Sam that the Americans needed mosquito nets, and they made something like about 500,000 mosquito nets for the soldiers in Europe. Of course there aren't any mosquitoes, but nevertheless Uncle Sam paid for them. That's the sort of corrupt thing you get. Here's another one. Here's a lot of mystery around Belsen. That was an absolute tragedy. That was a sort of a tragedy of war, not necessarily of the Germans, because we were bombing them left, right and centre, and they were running out of food, running out of medicine, and running out of everything at that time. This one here, Forged War Crimes. This is an interesting book, and it shows you how they doctor photographs and do so many things, and then to try and convince us that what they've said is correct. That's another one there, which is where the real Holocaust started. Jewish-run concentration camps. in the Soviet Union. That's where most people died. Positive Christianity in the Third Reich. Well, that's quite interesting. And this one here, Communism with the mask off and Bolshevism in theory and practice. And this one here is a book, one of the books that has just been taken off the Amazon book list, not because there's anything you shouldn't read in it, but simply because people don't want you to read it. And this is by Gerard Menuhin, the son of Yehudi Menuhin, the famous Jewish violinist. And the truth, tell the truth and shame the devil. And he's looked into it, and it's a very good book, very seriously written, and a subject we should all understand. We should all know about this. This shouldn't be a mystery. I shouldn't be telling you something that we don't know about, because clearly it's so important. Gruesome Harvest. Here's another book, a horrible book, or horrible stories about some of the things that happened to the Germans after the war. And so, there's a lot to be learnt, and we must get it right. We must tell the truth and shame the devil. King Edward the Eighth. One of the reasons that I think that he abdicated was not because of Mrs. Simpson. I mean, it was so trivial, but it was because he was in the First World War, like Hitler, and he knew what it meant to become involved in another world war, and consequently he was pushed out by the establishment. Anyway, that's enough of that. What about items of interest? Well, here's a little thing here. This is quite interesting. Someone gave me this, a friend of mine recently, from France. If you go over to France and you go around the battle areas and look in the hedges, you find things like this. This is the top of a shell, and they've got a date on here. March 1916. That's the top of it, and obviously it exploded. There's no danger involved with that now. And that's the sort of thing you can find. You find it in the hedgerows because there's still a lot of live ammunition out there in actual fact. And now this here is very interesting. I wonder how many of you know what this is and what it was for. You get them in submarines, but they're much bigger than this. Yes, you're right, it's a Periscope, and it's one they use in the trenches. Snipers would use these, and so you have this. You see, there's the eyepiece here. You look in there, and then you move this top piece here, and that to raise or lower your position. And so you can be down below the level of the ground surface, but in the trench, and if that gets shot at, you're going to be okay. Without that, you're not going to lose your helmet or your head. So that's quite an interesting one. Actually, I don't think this one's being used, but nevertheless, it's beautifully made, and the clarity is quite remarkable. So without one of these, if you were a sharpshooter, you'd likely to get shot yourself. So that can go back on there. Well, that's the end of this episode, and I look forward to seeing you next time when we'll have something else to talk about, and probably a few more of interesting items. Not very important, but nevertheless, they are significant. So until then, see you.
Sherlock Holmes, sharper than a razor and by far the most intellectual man on crime, can solve many problems in half the time. Sherlock Holmes, Sherlock